In today's video, you're going to learn how to cast shadows on Photoshop. So you're going to learn some basic techniques all the way to some advanced techniques to cast shadows outside of an object and inside of an object. So if you watch towards the end of the video, you'll learn all the different tools that you can use to cast shadows. So let's get started. So we're going to work with these four boxes right here to cast some shadows on. So if you don't know how to draw these boxes, I'll leave some videos in the description below on the basics of Photoshop. So first, let's start with this box right here. So for the first shadow, I'm going to show you how to use a tool called the Gaussian blur tool. So this is kind of a manual way of adding a shadow. So what I'm going to do is press and hold Control, that's Command if you're on a Mac, and click on the box 1 layer, which is this box. And what that will do is it will just select everything in that box right here. Next, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to name this layer Shadow. And I'm going to put this layer below the box 1 layer, so below this layer. And I'm going to choose the color picker tool right here at the bottom and choose a black color. And go to the paint bucket tool right here and just paint this in black. So you can't see it right now because it's underneath this box. So if I hide this box, you can see the black color. So I'm going to keep that box revealed, but I'm going to choose the shadow layer and go to Filter and choose Blur and click on Gaussian blur. So now you can see a nice shadow behind the box. So we just pretty much blurred that box that we created behind this yellow box right here. So it just looks like a shadow. So this is a little graph here. The more you move this to the right, the more blurry it becomes. The more you move it to the left, the less blurry it becomes. So let's create like a sharp shadow just like that, or maybe just around there. Just kind of like a basic shadow. And let's click on OK. Next, you can kind of move this just to the bottom, so it's kind of offset. And then you can also lower the opacity of this shadow layer, so it kind of looks more like a shadow. So that's how you kind of add in a shadow manually. And sometimes you have to add in a shadow in manually just on some different photos on Photoshop. But now there's a new tool called the drop shadow tool. So this is what I use most often now. So let's choose this layer right here, which is the box 1 copy layer right here. So this is you choose that box and go to layer, layer style, and drop shadow. So you choose whatever object or layer you want to cast a shadow on, go to layer, layer style, and drop shadow. And now you can see there's this little drop shadow right here, and you get all of these little controls right here. So first thing is there's different types of shadows. So I don't really play around with this much. So you can create like different effects on the shadow, and you can see that there's not really much of a difference. So I usually just leave it on multiply. Next is opacity. So you can increase how dark the shadow is. So let's make it quite dark, like 76%. And then there's the angle. So you can change the angle of the shadow, so where the light hits. So any different angle that you want. So you can kind of play around with that. So I'm just going to leave it at 90 degrees. So it's just straight to the top. So let's say that you want to edit the shadow now. So you didn't create the right shadow you want and you want to keep editing this. With the Gaussian blur, you can't actually edit this. It's just as it is. But with this, you can actually double click on the drop shadow effects layer right here. So under the box 1 copy layer, there's this drop shadow layer right here. So just double click on that. And if you don't see the layer panel, just go to Windows and click on layers right here. So if you double click on the drop shadow right here, then you'll get this graph back and you can start editing the shadow again. So before we edited the angle, now we can edit the distance. So how far does the shadow go down? How far does it spread? And how big is the shadow? So let's make it quite big, about that size. So now this box looks like it's more off the ground than this box here. So that's kind of the effects that a shadow creates. So that's cool. So let's click on OK on that one. So next, let's go to the next box now, and let's create a different type of shadow on this. So let's say I want this exact same shadow to be casted on this box. So you can do that by just going layer, layer style, and drop shadow. And you can see the same exact shadow is just casted on this box now. And you can also save the different types of shadows that you've got. So these are all the other shadows that I've created before. So you can click this one off and maybe add another one, or you can click that one off, maybe add this one. So I'm going to stick with this one here. and maybe I'll decrease the size of this shadow just a little bit. And let's say you want to add a second shadow to the same box. So why would you want to add a second shadow to the same box? Sometimes it actually gives it a different type of effect, more of like a 3D effect. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm just going to click on this little plus icon here. That's going to add a second shadow. So that's, you can see that it's gone darker. So on the second shadow, I'm going to decrease the distance a little bit and also decrease the size a little bit. And also let's decrease the distance just a little bit there and increase the size just a tiny bit. So this shadow is slightly darker and smaller than the other shadow that we created on this box. And you can see it's kind of like a nice shade, kind of goes really dark and then really light towards the bottom. So it's much more, it's kind of a different effect to this box here. So you can play around with this many different shadows as you want. So let's click on OK on that one. So let's play with this one here now. So let's go back here. So let's choose, copy this layer, and let's go to Image, Layer, Style, and Drop Shadow. So this time I'm going to add 3 shadows. So let's see what that will look like. So let's choose this, and this time I'm actually not going to create any new shadows at all. I'm just going to use the shadows that we created for these 2. So you can just click on this one, click on the next one, and the next one. And you can just keep adding more and more shadows. But as you can see, it gets quite dark. So what you can do is maybe lower the opacity on this one here, because that one's quite dark. Maybe lower the opacity on this one. Maybe lower the opacity on this one as well. Cool, so that looks really good. So let's click on OK on that one. And there's also another type of shadow where you can add like an inner shadow as well. So let's say this is a shadow kind of going inwards. So let's do that to this box right here. So let's go to Image, not Image, it's Layer. So I keep going to Image, I still get confused there, but it's Layer, Layer Style, and Drop Shadow. Then there's this thing called Inner Shadow right here. So you can click on that, and you can see there's an inner shadow now. So you can play around with the opacity of this shadow, maybe create a distance on that, and also create a kind of, this is called the choke. So the more it kind of comes in, so it kind of chokes in the original shape, but I want that to be just slightly on the edge, and also just add a size. There we go. So that looks good. So also for this one, you can still add another inner shadow, so to make it look even more realistic, like we did with the red box right here. So let's add a smaller shadow for this one. So let's decrease the size a little bit. Let's push it just a bit to the top. And let's lower the opacity just a tiny bit. And that's good. So I think I like it there. Maybe you can even offset the shadow just a little bit, but I'm going to leave it at 90. There you go. So that's an interesting looking shadow. Cool. So let's click on OK. There we go. So that's how you add shadows on Photoshop. So first is the manual kind of shadow. Sometimes you do have to use this manual shadow because all of these other drop shadow techniques usually doesn't work. Then there's the normal drop shadow, and then there's 2 drop shadows. And then there's, I think we added like 5 different drop shadows on this one with the shadows that we created in the past. So you can add those ones to this one as well. And then there's this one, which is the inner shadow. And then there's so many other different techniques here. There's like pattern overlay, there's gradient overlay, so that you can play around with so many different effects here. So I wouldn't be able to go through all of them in this one video. But you can play around with this and see if you like any of these effects here. So if you have any questions about any of the steps that we just took, you can comment down below. If you have a video request that if there's a video that you want me to make on Photoshop or on Adobe Illustrator, then you can also comment down below with that, and I'll consider making a video. But that's it for today's video, and I'll see you in tomorrow's video.